Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be looking at the support tier list for patch 14.6, and we'll also be looking at the patch notes here really briefly, just as it pertains to support, just to kind of see what the changes are and how they might affect the meta. But here's what it's going to look like. So not a ton of changes, but there are a couple of notable ones that we'll talk about. So if you enjoyed the content, please be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out a ton on the channel. Come by, check out the streams, usually starting most nights around 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, typically going till about 1 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, sometimes a little bit longer on the weekend, but we'll be happy to chill with you, hang out, got a lot of cool people, talk about League, talk about life, whatever you want to talk about. So, anyways, let's get in here. Okay, so, notable that, just so if you haven't read patch notes, if you demote now, then you go down to 50 LP from 75. So that's probably going to start dropping the overall average quite a bit. So I don't think that's really going to affect the meta most of the time at most ELO brackets. If you just kind of tread water, if you're like a 50% player or whatever, you'll probably stay in about the same place, and then it might potentially make it a little bit easier if other people that have negative win rates end up getting pulled down into your bracket. But which that would favor, in my opinion, like if you're facing weaker opposition and you know how to take really good advantage of engaged supports, that's a good thing. But I don't think it's going to matter that much for most people, most helos. I already think engaged supports are pretty good to begin with. Okay, so champions, Briar. I think that's a nerf. I don't know, like, she got a couple of changes, but I think it's quite a bit lower damage, so probably won't change the support matter too much. Cho'Gath won't change that much. It's good to see he's getting a little love, but his kit's still a bit clunky by modern standards. Diana is getting a little bit better. Don't think that's going to matter too much. The Galio one could be interesting. That's a lot of changes, so I'm not entirely sure, but I think they're playing it really safe with Galio. I think he's been out of the meta, just like nobody picks him for quite a while now. And it looks like they're just sort of nerfing all of his damage, unless I'm like misreading this. It's like nerf there, nerf there. So that's like wave clear getting nerfed. So what are they giving him? Winds of War nerfed. Slightly lower cooldown at max rank on Q. I mean, what he really needs to be a support is lower cooldown on his ult, so he can take advantage of that more. I guess they are buffing his passive, I would assume. But what they need, and I think he could be an interesting support, is lower cooldown on his ult, so you can move with that more often. Probably a little bit more tankiness on his W. And it would be nice if his Justice Punch could go through walls. Maybe that'd make him OP in some cases. It sounds like they're trying to make him a potential thing in the jungle. That would certainly help out there. So, I don't know. But I don't think it's going to matter. In the current state, interesting that they're paying attention to him, but I don't think it's going to matter. Okay, Gragas, couple of nerfs for top lane Gragas. He's already pretty off meta bot lane. Karma is getting several nerfs. I think this is really bad for Karma. I already didn't think she was amazing in the support role last time. She's better, if you're wondering, why is she not amazing in support when she's getting played in like mid, in pro, and occasionally like top. It's because she has the gold income to afford like big ticket AP items, specifically Malignants, at a much like faster, more reliable rate than support. Support, you're almost always broke. And that's why I don't really like supports that rely on a lot of gold. Right? Now, the exceptions are like Zyra and Brand, because they have really high base damages. And they're pretty good off of just one item, right? You just give them Leandries, they're going to do a lot of damage. But Karma doesn't have any percentage max health. She doesn't have any plants, like Zyra. And so her damage really doesn't scale that well unless you get AP. And the same thing with her shield. So, yeah, she already wasn't amazing in support, in my opinion, and these nerfs are just going to make that a bit worse. Okay, Kayn changes won't affect support. Some people are playing Ornn support in pro. I don't think it's been very successful. The big thing with Ornn is you want levels. Like, a big part of his kit is unlocking those special item upgrades that you get for people starting level 13. But as a support, you almost always have the lowest XP on your team by a very large margin because you're splitting XP almost always with people, and you're also doing wards, which don't give a lot of XP if you kill wards, and you're like running up and down the river to rotate, you're covering people, like you're just doing a lot of stuff that's not giving you a lot of XP. And frankly, you want to be low on XP a lot of times as a support and just give that XP to laners, you know, as much as you can so that they get to stack the multiplicative power of all their golden items with their abilities as they level up. So it's just kind of contrary usually to what a support's trying to do, to try to play something that requires a high amount of levels to really become unlocked. So he is getting played specifically with Senna because he does get to farm, he does get gold, he just doesn't get those levels that he really needs. Okay, rec side changes probably don't matter for the support role. Senna, this is supposed to affect farming Senna, like her kills on spawn are down, but as we'll see in a minute, like her win rate overall, even as a support, is down quite a bit from where it was. So if we look at like popularity, yeah, she's at 49%. A few patches ago, she's like 52-53% of support. So that's not looking good. And then Shen, getting some changes, probably not gonna, it's not gonna bring like support Shen in. You might see him top lane. If Shen does become popular in the top, that does make it a bit harder for engage supports bottom because he's going to be able to interfere with a lot of your engages and dives and things like that. So that'll make stuff like Alistar, Nautilus, Leona a little bit weaker if he's good top lane. Same thing if like TF is really good, which TF's been nerfed. He's kind of a little more off meta, but Talia is very popular and she can also rotate down to bot lane pretty fast. So anyways, probably not going to matter too much, but if he does become popular, again, marginal little nick to the power of engaged supports. Scion, not going to matter for support, but good for farming Scion. Smolder. Now, this one will matter, I think, to some extent, because this is a pretty substantial nerf. This is a change. They were going to make his stacks 275 before he started doing the true damage, but they decided, or the execute, but they decided to make it 225 still, but the amount of damage that it deals is far, far less. So at 225, it's just 6.5 flat. So they're basically, it's nerfing it by a seventh to start, so that's like 14% to start, and then as you level up, as you get more stacks, then it doesn't ever increase. So that's definitely, like, it's still going to be really good if you get there, but it's not going to be like the extreme kill everybody, especially if you start getting, 300, 400 stacks, that type of thing in the super late game. And then they're making it a lot harder to hit Achu. This is a thing that seems subtle, like just 10 radius, but trust me, it makes a very big difference. When I played Zyra, back in the day, season 2 and 3, like the radius on her E was much wider, and they narrowed it by something like this, and it's just like way, way harder to hit it. And then Rakan, his radius used to be a bit wider. They narrowed it just by what seemed like a very small margin. Very big difference in hitting that skill shot. So we'll see how it plays out, but that's going to make it a lot easier to dodge the bubble. And then flap, 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 you are 25% slower than you used to be. So that's pretty significant. So we'll see how this plays out. I think the scaling Smolder comps aren't going to be as good. So like the enchanters people were pairing with him, your Milios, that type of stuff will probably go down a little bit. But something like Jinx is becoming more popular, and so those types of supports are way better with stuff like Jinx. So we'll see. But that's one hyperscaler that's going to be down a little bit. But that might increase the popularity of other hyperscalers. So we'll see. Tryndamere getting a couple nerfs. Follow Bear nerfs, not going to affect support. Infinity Edge becoming a little bit better. This is nice for the traditional 3-item power spike crit user. So someone like a Jinx, who might want to get something like Kraken, blank it out, the thing that shoots out the bolts at multiple people plus Infinity Edge Hurricane. There we go. It's been so long since that item's been meta on Auto Champs, I forgot the name. But you could probably go for like Kraken Infinity Edge, or Kraken Hurricane Infinity Edge, or you could go like Kraken Rapid Fire Cannon Infinity Edge. Just something like that. A lot of those crit champs want Infinity Edge 3rd or 4th item. So the hyperscalers. Your Jinx is kind of the big one. Maybe like Jhin starts getting this a little bit more than the lethality build. I'm not sure, but almost nobody was getting Infinity Edge, so this will make that a lot more popular on those champs. And then Navori Quick Blades. I think this item was already pretty good on quite a few champions. This is making it even better. So obviously your caster type of champions are really going to like this. Your stuff like Zeri, Zaya, just the standard Navori people are all going to get a little bit of a boost from that. And then also Lord Doms. So this is going to, affect champs that do pretty much all physical damage and make them a little bit better. So that's like most ADCs are going to want a Lord Dom somewhere in their build, and so this will make them a little bit stronger in the late game. And then Mortal Reminder buffed up a little bit. Pretty rare item, but it does show up sometimes. You can't go Doran's anymore and a support item. I don't think this was that popular in solo queue, but in pro for like heavy push lanes, like Ashe Varus type of lanes, you would see people occasionally start with like double Doran's Blade, and then on the first back, the support would get the support item. So they're putting a stop to that, which is going to mean that there's going to be less pressure potential early on in those like turbo high pressure lanes. So again, I don't think lower elos, and when I say lower elos, I mean like really like under masters. It's not low, it's just not like really high level play. Just don't take advantage of that kind of aggression in the early game that often. So I don't think it's going to matter if you're under masters. It might, but it's going to be less pressure for sure, which is better for scaling champions in the early game. And then World Atlas, so they're basically nerfing the gold on this, so you only get to 800 gold total, although you get it in about the same amount of time. So this is going to hurt champions that are really item reliant. So it's those early game pressure champs that spike off of one item, your Brands, your Zyras, your AP champs, your Lux, your Xeraths that want to get to their, like big ticket purchase. It's going to make it a little bit harder for them. Now, it is only 200 gold, but in support terms, that's like an extra 2 or 3 minutes, potentially, of, gold that you're going to be able to get. So yeah, that's, again, going to favor scaling champs that buy cheaper items or just have higher baseline effectiveness in their kit. So enchanters that have the cheap items, the 2,300 gold items, or tanks that they also buy cheap items, but they also just have a high level of effectiveness built into their kit with their CC. So yeah, primarily I think this is going to hurt the high pressure, squishy range champions in lane, which is kind of what you face every lane just about these days. So I think it was probably right to tap it down a little bit. And then Solstice Slay is going to 20% for 2.5 seconds instead of 25%. This probably won't matter too much. The heal is the same. It's still potentially enough speed to make a difference for an engage or for an escape. Obviously, it's not great, but bonus health duration. What? I thought it just flat out healed you. What is this bonus health? Oh, I thought this was a flat out heal. Oh, it's just temporary health, so it's basically a shield. Okay, well that does make it worse than I thought. That only lasts for 2.5 seconds now. I think a lot of champs that get Solstice Slay have other options. They're probably fine. Like, you might still see this on, like, Maokai, who was popular, but, like, Rakan can go for, like, either the bubble item, like the double bubble item, or the thing that, like, gives you the damage protection shield. Like, there's usually a lot of other options for most champs, so I don't think this is gonna, like, really affect the meta that much, although... Again, Maokai uses it quite a bit. Rakan uses it quite a bit. But both of them have other options that I think are fine. Epic items. Okay, so a lot of these are getting nerfed. So, like, early combination items, especially the offensive ones, are getting nerfed here. So, Caulfield's Warhammer, Fiendish Codex, losing 10 AP. So this is going to affect those Zyra's brand, Lux, Xerath type of champs are all going to get hit a little bit off of the Codex, and then Caulfield's Warhammer is going to hit the lethality ADCs a little bit early on. Glacial costs more, so that's bad. But not a lot of people rush Glacial. I mean, if you're going Frozen Heart early on, it's great. I guess it's in Zeke's as well, which is somewhat popular, but it's not a component of the movement speed item or Locket early on, or Knight's Vow, and those are all like pretty popular support tank items too. Okay, so Haunting Guys also getting hit a little bit again for those early game AP champs. Now this one's only 5 ability power instead of 10. Codex, that's a gutting right there. I mean, that item, isn't that like a 900 gold item? Losing 10 ability power is equal to 200 gold. That's pretty massive, I think, in terms of percentage nerf. And then Hearthbound Axe, 5 less AD, but it's 50 less gold, so that's a minor nerf. Alternator, minor nerf. Dirk, 5 AD. Now, that's kind of a big deal. That's not getting any compensation. Now, the lethality is still crazy on Dirk early on, and this is probably, like, the most powerful combined item that gets abused so much early on in lane. But 5 AD is pretty significant. That's like 185 gold worth of AD. So that's pushing 200 gold on an item that I believe costs 1,100. So that's, again, a pretty large percentage nerf of effectiveness on that item. And this stuff like gets bought throughout the game too, obviously, but it's going to be most impactful with the first one that you buy. Brutalizer, lethality going down 3. I think this is not as bad as losing 5 AD. It depends on the champ, like the baseline damage on their abilities, but the scaling with AD on their abilities. But that's probably a pretty decent little nerf. Tunnelers, 50 extra gold probably doesn't matter. Inverted barriers actually going down. Okay, very few people get that item, I think, a lot of times, especially early on, so it's probably a good thing. Okay, Void Grub, I'm not really sure why they're doing this. Okay, so it's to help junglers with Smite. Okay, it decays over 10 seconds. But if you're a jungler, and I don't know of any, I can't think of any offhand, but junglers that are able to reduce healing somehow, then that could help clear the grubs. So it'll help any junglers that do that, which I think is pretty niche. But also it's going to hurt anyone that can break shields. So I believe if you had something like a Rel with her Q, you could, break all the shields on the grub, and it probably just, massacred them. Or I think Renekton, if he comes out and helps, can also break shields. Like, there's a few corner cases, but I don't think this is going to matter that much in the long run. And then, okay, so nothing else matters. So not that many changes, but the overall meta is shifting a little bit, so let's check out just the win rates here, the PBI. So again, I'm not like a huge fan of just looking at win rates, but they do matter, both in solo queue and then also kind of looking at pro just to get a sense, because what people do in pro influences solo queue as well, even though they're kind of two different games in many respects. So first up, we've got Rakan, as usual, as most people would suspect. This champion is just almost always really, really good. I talk about it all the time. If you're a regular, you're probably tired of hearing about it every patch if you're a new person. The thing that makes Rakan so good, there's several things, but it all revolves around versatility. Okay, so he can engage really well, and the reason for that is there's so many different ways that he can engage. Right? So he can follow up other people. He can use his E and then W and knock them up. He can run people down with his R and run up close to them and force them to use their dash or use their flash and then follow it with his W. So they can't just like flash a hook with a smart Rakan in the same way they could flash a Blitzcrank pull or, Leona R or whatever, because he can just walk up on you. And if he's running up and you're just trying to play this little game of chicken with him, just to wait until he W's, if you let him get close enough, he can just flash on you with his R and then W you. So there's just so many different combinations you can do to outplay people and just make sure you're going to get that engage. He can run through people, so like if they have a tank trying to frontline for him, you can usually run through that tank and get to the ADC anyways. So, really strong engaged, but he also has a shield and peels really well. And that's something that a lot of the other hard engages don't do very well. So, something like Nautilus and Leona, they don't have shields. So, he can just completely stuff so many assassins that are trying to dive your AD carry because he's going to take Guardian. And then he's got his shield, which is pretty high. It's 280 base if you include both components of the shield with a 1.4 AP ratio. He doesn't get a lot of AP these days, but it's there if you want to work some of that into your build. And you can take the bubble thing if you want as well, the double bubble, and then that's going to prevent an additional 140 damage to him. After I think you have to CC him to do that, but you're gonna CC him. You're gonna press R, and then you're gonna have your charm right on top of him. If you R and then E onto your ally, it's so hard for the enemy to outplay or dodge that, right? Like a Master Yi, if they're on the AD carry, you try to hit them with a Nautilus hook or even something like a Nautilus ult. If they alpha strike at the right time, or if Maokai's running at your ADC and he just goes untargetable with his W. You can't really peel that. It's very hard. They have so much outplay potential on a lot of other engages. But with, Rakan, you're going to sit on them with your ult ticking, and so as soon as they become targetable again, you're going to CC them and knock them up and turn the fight around. You also have a heal, so when you CC them, you can hit them point blank with the Q, and that's going to be another 100-something heal. So you're basic, and you often take Locket, so it's just so frustrating and difficult to dive somebody on the backline against a Rakan because they're going to have 1,000 extra effective health with all of this CC that's very difficult to outplay. So he's really good on offense. He's really good on defense. He has really versatile items. He can get selfish stuff to make himself more tanky and difficult to blow up. And he's already super mobile, so he's hard to kill anyways. Or he can get more team-oriented stuff. It's unusual in this meta, but you could get something like an Ardent Censer or a Staff of Flowing Water or a Shirelia's Redemption. There's all kinds of things you can get to help your team out in a bunch of different scenarios. So he has probably the most diverse item options of any support, probably the most diverse sort of play patterns in terms of how you approach fights, how you can adapt to different situations. And he's one of the best at controlling vision, because he has that free dash with his W where he just gets away from almost anything, right? Especially if you have an ally nearby. If you just dash away and then, E over to an ally, you just close a distance of 1,400 instantly. So it's so hard to chase him, and that lets him get those deep wards in the jungle and contest wards that's just not safe for other supports to contest. So he's, one of the vision kings out there. The only one that might rival him is maybe Pyke, which we'll talk about in a second in terms of vision. But really good vision, really good engage, really good versatility, really good peel. His only downside is that he's kind of high skill cap. You have to make the right decision. If you're going in at the wrong time and you get hit with CC, or you don't dodge the CC when you're trying to engage, then you can get blown up. So he's a little tankier than people think. His baseline stats are definitely higher than an enchanter, especially when you factor in the passive shield that he gets as basically bonus health. But you can get locked down and killed. So he's designed to go in there and get out. And if you don't get out, that's a problem. Also, AoE damage is kind of a problem because you have to get close to people to peel them. You have to get close to people to shield them. So against something like Brand, who's very popular right now, you try to go in and shield an ally who's getting Brand ulted, you just gave him a bounce target, right? So now it's just going to bounce between you and do even more damage. So there definitely are some matchups that are not amazing for him, but I think in the most matchups, he's great, or at least playable. So that also makes him a really good blind pick, which is difficult to say about much other supports. You can first pick him in almost anything and find a way to win the game. Okay, so Rakan, awesome, as usual. And, he's got a pretty high win rate for Rakan. It's rare for him to get, much over 52% just because he is higher skill cap and people do make a lot of mistakes when they try to play him and they're learning him. I think the only one that's probably trickier is, Thresh. But yeah, so he's kind of hard to learn, but he's still got 52.5 despite the fact that he's pretty hard to execute on. It's easy to play him at a very super safe basic level and just never die, right? He's got great escapes. He's really hard to gank, all that kind of stuff. But to really make those high impact plays and choose the right moments to go in and decide whether you need to be diving with your divers or staying back and peeling your AD carry, or like you really have to understand the fights and the matchups and what your team needs, to play him at a really high level. And I think that's what a lot of people struggle with. I struggle with that too from time to time, even though I play him all the time. So he's got a pretty good win rate here, and then in pro, he's like the third most picked, and one of the highest win rates as well. So he's just kind of good across the board at all skill brackets, in my opinion. Okay, and then Blitz. I think Blitz is, just a solo queue warrior. He's almost always really good. But especially since they nerfed a lot of the other early game champs, Blitz is somewhat unique in that he can hard dominate early, but he doesn't really need items. Like, his items don't matter because his baseline abilities do a ton of damage early on, and he just displaces people from such a large distance. Like, that hook is just so brutal that it really doesn't matter what stage the game is in. A lot of times, if you hook somebody who's squishy, they're going to die. So it doesn't matter if you have 0 items or 6 items. It's not going to make that much of a difference. So the fact that they're nerfing all of these other early game champs that can potentially give him a problem and just harass and poke him out early is just going to make his life a lot better. Because he doesn't have a lot of healing in the early game. So if, the Varus Ashe lane is able to hide behind their minions and poke him down, that can be a problem. But at the same time, if he gets an open opportunity and hits those hooks, those champs are going to die, like, instantly. So he's really good versus a lot of these squishy champs. Again, early game, depending on how well people position, how well you hit your hooks, could be hit or miss. But definitely once you get into that mid to late game, versus, like, especially squishy supports, which are super popular right now, they're dead. Right? They go try to contest a ward on something, or you just happen to be at the objective first, and you have vision on them, or whatever, you just hook them over the wall dead. So he's one of the most brutal punishers of people that don't respect vision. So that makes him a lot better, especially at lower brackets. But it can even affect people at higher brackets that aren't respecting that vision. So really good, very simplistic champion. You just hit your hook, you're killing people, you miss it, you're worthless. So it's pretty binary. But it's so brutal if it's working, if you get it. And obviously he roams extremely well. He doesn't really need the cooldown reduction because he has one ability that matters. And he's probably only casting it one time anyways to start a fight. And even if you miss it, you can just, like, disengage a lot of times too. So that allows him to go for something like mobility boots and just, like, roam around the river and just be a terror. Because, again, if you're trying to contest him for that vision and he gets you and someone else is there, you're dead. He can roam and, sit on middle, blow flashes. There's just so many obnoxious things you can do with this guy. And he can just completely zone people off the wave, right? Like, against double range, if you get any kind of advantage and it's, like, pushing against somebody, you can just sit right there in the bush, near the front of the wave, and they're just not even going to be able to walk up barely into experience range versus him. So very brutal, very good champion. There are, of course, some major counters to him you got to watch out for. So Morgana is not great in the meta overall, but her ability to black shield that is pretty good. Several ADCs have dashes where they can dash out of it or spell shield it. If people ever buy that item, the lethality item with the spell shield, that's really obnoxious, or Banshee's Veil later on. Those items aren't popular right now, but if you are one of the only major threats on the team, then they can get that, and that will shut you down pretty hard. So there definitely are some things in the game that can deal with him, but with a lot of stuff that's in the meta right now, the lack of tanks in solo queue, the double-ranged, squishy champions, he's really good. Okay, and then Janna, I'll go ahead and put her up here. Now, this is just kind of like, I just have to put her up here out of respect. I personally am not a huge fan of playing Janna right now in the meta, just because I just feel like Engage is so good. One of the main things to climb is being able to punish people for making mistakes. They try to go check that ward when they shouldn't be doing that, they're dead. Like, that's kind of my philosophy these days, is you really need to be able to punish people for being out of position and for doing stuff they shouldn't do, because a lot of people do that. They'll just walk up and try to ward the dragon pit right when dragon spawns. And, if you're smart, if you're pinging your team, you're going to be there 30 seconds early. You're going to have vision established, lanes pushed, ready to go. And, when that I guess Ash will hawk shot it, but, when that Lulu comes up and tries to just ward that Dragon Pit to see what you're doing, boom, Blitz Hook. Boom, Rakan over the wall. Boom, Leona, whatever. Like, I just feel like having that in your arsenal, being able to punish people for that, or punish people for overextending, right? Like, you just fake like you're going to go ward, and then you hang out in a bush, and they try to tag team your ADC, and you come out of nowhere with the jungler and kill them. I just think that's so powerful. Janna doesn't really have those options, right? Like, you can roam, you can throw a W at him, you can throw a tornado at him, but it's just really not great for doing that. Now, she's good at fighting against that type of stuff to some extent. Not so much like a Blitz Hook, but most of the other ones she can peel really well. But then you're just depending on your ADC being able to out-stat check the enemy team, which does work a lot of times. But it just doesn't give you a ton of versatility, in my mind, where you're just counting on your ADC to actually have hands and make plays and for someone else on your team to start a fight or make a plan. Because, like, what happens in my experience if you don't play something that can start a fight, a lot of times, depending on your elo, just other people won't start fights. And if people don't start good, clean fights for your team, then they're going to get caught. They're just going to wander around. They're not going to be sure what to do. And then they're going to get caught in a side lane and start flaming each other. It just... A team without direction, if you can't pull the trigger and punish the enemy, they're eventually going to punish you. That's how I see it. But, all of that said, she does have a really high win rate right now. Almost 54%. So, a lot of people do really well on Janna. And I think part of, again, why the tanks usually don't have as high of a win rate is because you have to understand macro and make the decision on when to go in. And if you make the wrong decision, you're going to feed, and it's going to be really bad. So it's potentially, could be high risk, low reward if you don't know what you're doing. Versus if you get a lot of practice, if you think about it, if you understand the meta, then it's going to be low risk, high reward on your engages. But Janna, you don't have to make a lot of decisions, right? Again, you're hanging out in the back, you're shielding people, and you're using your tornado or your R to stop people that are trying to dive your AD carry. Like, your mission is pretty clear. You don't have to understand macro. You don't have to do a lot of stuff. Now, you can rotate with Janna. She is kind of fast. You can rotate to side lanes and, help out with that. She is one of the better enchanters at establishing vision because she can escape so well if people try to chase her down. So, like, obviously you do have other options. I'm not saying she's, like, a completely brain-dead champ. I'm just saying that you don't have to make as many high-stakes decisions in order for your team to be successful. You can just kind of chill and protect and win, just by the stats, just by default. So, I think if you practice a lot, if you learn something like a Leona, Rakan, Nautilus, Blitz, that type of thing, I think it will probably serve you better in the long run if you're climbing, particularly at lower elos. But you can definitely do it with enchanters too. Okay, and Pyke's kind of an interesting one that I'm not entirely sure what's going on here, but his win rate's up quite a bit. I think it's up 2 or 3%. Let me see. I guess not a ton. I guess he's just been kind of floating around here. It feels like it's up, but maybe it's not. I don't know. But Pyke is pretty good. I like that he has a lot of similarities with Rakan in that he has very good mobility. He's very hard to gank, so if you're weak-sided, that's fine. And he's really good at vision. So he can get into the enemy territory, get that vision, and get out, but also he can build Umbral. And Umbral is basically like 2 or 3 extra sweepers, right? Like, you just get so much vision control with Umbral, no one's ever going to have a ward on the map. And if you take Zombie Ward, you're going to be basically getting 100 wards a game. So, extremely good vision control, very elusive, but the reason I have him a bit lower is that he's just not quite as versatile, right? He does have some versatility in how he acts. He doesn't have to take the hook, right? Like, you can hook somebody and then not follow up if it doesn't look like a good play, right? Unlike something like a Leona or a Nautilus who basically, like, has to go in pretty deep if they hit that hook. So he does have that level of versatility, but you really don't have a lot of peel. You don't have a lot of CC. Like, you've got your hook, you've got your E that can be like a little bit of CC, That E is really awkward if you try to use that offensively to get the stun, because then you don't have very much to get back out. And he is going to be squishier than a lot of other tanks. Like, his base health is pretty high, but he's heavily discouraged from building tank items these days. When he was most powerful and most OP was when you could go tank Pyke with, like, Frozen Heart and stuff like that back in the day, but they've changed his numbers around to where that's not as good. I think. I mean, let me see. He's not going tank Pyke, is he? No. They changed it around where you basically are not going to do any damage if you go tank Pyke. So it's just still kind of Umbral, Youmuu's. So he is kind of affected by the fact that early items got nerfed a bit, like Serrated Dirk. But he also gets pressured somewhat early on by stuff like Lux and Xerath. So I feel like it's kind of a push. It's like, yeah, he got nerfed a little bit, but some of his, major adversaries also got nerfed early on. So he can snowball really hard if you're chaining those ults together. That allows him to get a lot of gold to buy these expensive items. But if you don't get those executes, if you're really far behind, then Pyke can feel kind of bad. Into tanks, it's a little bit rough, I feel, because you're not going to be able to get the executes. But, if you're timing it well, feeling it out, getting those executes can be easier to get kills, to get gold, than with some of the other champs like Brand and Zyra, just depending on the situation. So, try him out if you want. I might try him out. But this might be the time where he's actually pretty good. He obviously wants a lot of squishy champions to kill, and he's pretty good at killing these if he gets the right situation. Most of these squishy popular champions. And he does have some poke resistance too with his gray skin passive. Okay. Then we've got Brand. So Brand has been nerfed quite a few times, but I think if you want to play an AP champ, then he's probably one of the better ones. I tried playing Zyra the other day, and she is still really good. And I know that Faded on the channel, longtime viewer, friend of the channel, really likes Zyra and has had a lot of success. So I think you definitely can win games with Zyra. But I feel like Brand is just going to have more... Brand is a little more matchup dependent, but if the enemy does group up, or if they have a lot of melee champs, then like his ultimate just bouncing around just does such a crazy amount of damage. And the fact that he does have a stun, like a hard stun and not just a root like Zyra does, I think is helpful. So I think the ceiling on Brand's damage is probably much higher, especially with Leandri's. I think he uses it a little bit better than Zyra. His range, I think, it's about the same as Zyra in terms of the range. He's less dependent on the plant. Some champions can clear those plants pretty quickly, depending on the situation, or like move away from the plant, dash out of her ultimate. I mean, you could dash out of his ult too. So they're different. They are a bit more situational, but I just feel like Brand puts out a bit more damage, and he also kills objectives a little bit faster. So as a support, I think you're just going to be contributing a lot more damage because he has that max health burn to something like a Baron or a Dragon, and just help your team out with that a little bit more. So they're both pretty good. I will say Rylai's is extremely obnoxious on him as well, because just how much your burn stays around and just how slow people are for so long. I think it's just a lot easier to touch a lot of people with your ultimate, with that Rylai's, and just keep them slowed in a team fight, which gives him a little bit of extra utility that Zyra can do, but it's not quite as good, in my opinion. But they're both, probably top tier AP choices if you want to do that. And again, particularly good in lower elos where you can punish people for being out of position in lane. Just instead of engaging on them with Rakan or hooking them in Blitz, you're just going to blow them up yourself, potentially. They are a little bit more item dependent, although not very. Again, like just with Leandri's, they're going to be cooking. So, anyways, both of them are pretty good. Leona is another one that I think is pretty good, pretty underrated right now. Has a fairly high win rate. The thing about Leona that differentiates her from some of the other champs is that she has very low cooldowns, a lot of CC, and she can kind of engage anytime, anywhere. So she can go through minion waves with her E. She doesn't have to worry about lining up hooks like Blitz or Nautilus. And her ult's on a 90-second cooldown. So someone like Rakan can go through the wave with his W whenever he wants, but he's only got that one piece of CC. Versus Leona, and his ult is like 130, I think, to start. Versus Leona can go through there, and she's going to lock people up for, 2 or 3 seconds without her ult, and then, her Q's going to be back up again in no time. So I guess like 2 seconds without the ult, and then, 2 or 3 seconds later, she's going to hit him again with a Q. So very sustainable, high duration CC on a single target. Really, really good at snowballing. If you get ahead, you can just keep engaging over and over again, especially if you have like a Tristana or a Draven or whatever. They're just not even going to be able to step in the lane. Also dives extremely well because she gets that extra armor off of her W. So really, really good offensive, hard snowball, Smurf type of champion. But if she falls behind, she's one of the worst at falling behind because it's easy to outplay her ult. If you don't hit the middle with it, it's just going to be a slow instead of a stun. Versus with Nautilus, like that R is going to hit people no matter what and can knock up multiple people. It's not affected by Mercury Treads. Leona is challenged by Mercury Treads and Cleanse. A lot of people take Cleanse against her, so that is something she has to deal with that some of these other hook champs aren't as affected by. So, anyways, really good if you want a high offensive option. Maokai's another one. Has been very popular. Some people might consider him as still. His win rate has gone down a decent chunk. And Solstice Slay is going to hurt him. He did get some nerfs directly to his stats. But he still has really good vision control with the seeds. He still has that point-click W, which locks people down very well. His R is extremely difficult to dodge. Takes a lot of coordination and a tank on the enemy team to all line up to dodge those brambles. So, he's still pretty good. Kind of like Leona, he is heavily affected by Mercury Treads and Cleanse. He kind of gets dumpstered in lane. They did nerf his healing a little bit in lane, so against like double poke, unless the jungler shows up, if you're on weak side and you're just spending the whole time sitting under tower, there's not a lot you can do, right? Versus if you're Blitzcrank or, Rakan or sometimes even Nautilus, you can find like a hook angle, just catch him out of position. It's hard to do that as Maokai. You can flash W on him, but it doesn't feel quite as powerful as some of the other options without the jungle help. Now, if you're strong side, if the jungler's just going to come down and camp you, and you can just kill him every time your R's up, or you get a flash W or something, then he's very good, obviously. But I think this is an appropriate place. He's still good. He's just not as good as he was. And then Milio's another one, especially if we start seeing stuff like Jinx, become really powerful, or some of these other hyper-scaling champs with that are using Infinity Edge or Kraken, that type of stuff. Milio's really good. A lot of shields. Early on, he's very good with kind of this double range meta where he can give even more range off of his W, which is crazy heals. He's really hard to trade against early on because the interaction with the W and Airy. He does have a peel, like with his Q, which is okay. It's situational, but it can knock people back and stop engage. So like if a Zack's jumping out of a bush at you or something, or Rakan's trying to run at your ADC, if you play it really well, you can stuff that with your W, which is really nice, which a lot of enchanters outside of Janna can potentially have a hard time with. So that's good. And then obviously your ult versus a lot of CC versus something like, Maokai, Leona, a lot of that type of stuff, his ultimate's going to be very good. And if you just double shield somebody and you ult him, and you have something like a redemption, it's just extremely difficult to burst people down, kind of like with Rakan. Now, his engage is a lot sketchier. He doesn't really have engage, but he can at least speed people up so that other people can engage, which Janna can't do, unless they're running towards her, which is not engaging, usually. So, anyways, his win rate's not super high, but I think he is good if you do start to see those hyperscalers come back into play, particularly Jinx a little bit more. Also good with something like Vayne. Nautilus has a low win rate right now, but I swear I feel like he has such potential to be good. It's just his numbers are low. He's not as tanky as some of the other tanks. His abilities don't do as much damage. So it's hard to blow people up as fast, and you can't tank towers as well. So I want him to be good. He's a lot of fun to play, and I feel powerful when he's working. But as you can see, super popular in Pro, doesn't have a super high win rate. And then it's a similar story where he's not as popular in solo queue, but the win rate is also struggling a little bit. I wouldn't be surprised if he's one of the lowest PBIs. He's down there, right? So he's picked fairly often at almost 10%, but he's got like a 49% win rate. So again, stats aren't everything, and I think he has the potential to be really good. But again, it's just those numbers. You pay for the consistency of his ult with sort of his lackluster W and his lackluster E in terms of survivability and damage. So ult, very strong. One of the most powerful engage ults in the whole game because it's very difficult to avoid and it's a knock-up, so it can't be cleansed. Merc treads don't affect it. That's awesome. Hook does pretty good single target damage and has a really fat hitbox. So it's very easy to land that open field, but you can't land it over walls. So that means that you can't punish people as easily. So that scenario I was talking about is very common where you got the little squishy support trying to walk up and ward Dragon Pit or Baron Pit or whatever. He can't punish that as easily. You either have to flash over the wall. You can do that. If you take Hex Flash, you can do it even better. You can ult him over the wall, but you can't hook them and pull them to you over the wall. So you can work around it, but it is a limiting factor that some of the other engage, supports don't have to deal with as much. But I still think he has the potential to be really good. Might be controversial, but I'm still going to put him tier 2 because I think if you do master the times to engage, he's good. And his hook is a displacement. So against other engage, he can actually peel a little bit better than something like a Leona. Because again, if you have a Zac coming over a wall at you, if you hook them in the air, it will knock them out of their thing. Right? Or you've got like a Rakan coming at you, or you've got just any number of things that are trying to fly at you. Tristana trying to jump at you. He can hook that out if he's really good and times it correctly. Okay. And then the final one I'll talk a little bit about here is Alistar. He's been kind of coming out of nowhere in Pro. He's getting played a lot more often, and he has a pretty high win rate. I think the thing with him is he does have sustain, which a lot of these other melee champs don't have outside of Pyke and Rakan. They can really struggle versus these early pressure supports, the Varus Ashe type of stuff, Xerath, Jhin, all that kind of stuff. So he does have the heal for both himself and his ally. He can engage through the minion wave, which is really good again. But his main sort of claim to fame is those dives. He's so good on the strong side. If the jungler is going to come down and dive, he's one of the best at level 6. So I think that's why he's really succeeding in Pro. His win rate in solo queue is okay, but it's just the reliability of the engage and just how powerful he is when he dives. Some of the best survivability when his ult's going on. So that's pretty good. And he does have that versatility too, where he also has a displacement with his headbutt, so he can like peel engage if he wants to. He has a knock-up, so he can do things with that. I wish they made his E a little bit more consistent, a little bit better, but maybe that'd just make him too overpowered. But yeah, pretty good. Short range though, so a little bit more than Maokai, but definitely way less than something like a Nautilus or a Leona. So you have to either get a flank, or you have to be facing someone that's really slow and you're getting Moby boots or whatever. But I think he's pretty good right now, and it's reflected in the stats. And that's pretty much it for like most of what I wanted to talk about. I did drop Senna a little bit just because her win rate has fallen precipitously to like 49%, where she was like 52 or 53. They nerfed the souls, but that shouldn't affect support Senna too much, so I'm not entirely sure what's going on there. I think she still has a lot of potential if you're really good on her to make her work. We're seeing a lot of Rel in pro play, mostly in the jungle, but sometimes as support, and she's got a pretty good win rate there. Her, I think solo queue is a little bit less impressive, I think. It's probably not 2, it's probably like 53. Yeah, 52. So, I mean, that's pretty good. So, I don't know, maybe I could definitely see putting her in tier 2 for someone that's good on her and knows what they're doing. She has a lot of utility, lots of things she can do. She can break shields. She can engage, like, doesn't peel, like, super well. But she's got a lot of interactions that are powerful with a lot of different champions out there. She helps people engage really well with her little speed boost. So she's got a lot of stuff that's good at her. I just feel like I don't see her as often, and she's maybe not as consistent as some of the other options out there. But maybe that's wrong. Maybe she could be tier 2. It's like most of the stuff in tier 3, if you're really good at it, or it's the right matchup, or it's a good counter pick or something, can be very effective. So that doesn't mean these champs aren't playable. I just feel like they're just not as consistent in either yeah, either don't have the consistency or don't have the ceiling, don't have the really high level of power if you play them to the max, like some of the higher level champs. But you can definitely win on them. Karma's down there. I explained Karma before. Malignant's still a really good item on her. Might still be viable mid, but I feel like support, it's getting rough because she's being balanced around mid now. Which almost always, if something gets balanced in a different lane, it's going to hurt it a lot in support. I don't know if that's always true, but it feels like that happens a lot. And then that's pretty much it. So yeah, I mean, all of your sort of your poke champions like Xerath, Lux, stuff like that, still really good if you can snowball, if you can get ahead of early, especially if you have a long range or bully lane partner. That's kind of the meta in pro right now, is to go for double range and bully people. Although there's quite a few people that are trying to counter that with engage too. So it's a pretty healthy meta out there, I will say. There's a lot of different things that are viable, a lot of different strategies out there. So, I mean, really at the end of the day, this is what I think. But, play whatever you want. Play what you think, can win you some games. Because I do think there are a lot of things out there, especially like meta picks from all sorts of different roles, from engage to enchanter to, damage, pressure champions. All of those are pretty viable as roles right now. So just pick somebody who's one of the best at doing whatever that task is, and I think you'll be in good hands. But anyways, okay, that's going to be it. Thank you very much. Have a good day, and we'll see everybody next time.